The gavel echoed like a thunderclap across the courtroom, and every eye turned to the woman sitting across from me, my aunt, Evelyn. Her lips curled into a smug little smile, the kind people wear when they're certain they've already won. She had just declared, without even blinking, that I owed her $30,000 for raising me. $30,000. You could almost hear the whispers ripple through the room. A few eyebrows shot up, a couple of people shook their heads, and me? I just sat there, torn between disbelief and an almost absurd urge to laugh. Because really, who invoices their own family for childhood? But before you think this is just another messy family drama, let me assure you, this was no ordinary courtroom squabble. It was a showdown years in the making, a collision of buried resentments, unspoken sacrifices, and one woman's greed finally laid bare under the fluorescent lights of justice. Now, if you had walked in that day, you would have seen me as a young professional, calm, composed, and ready to defend myself. What you wouldn't have seen were the scars I carried, the late nights crying into a pillow, or the quiet resilience that had been building inside me since I was a kid. Because here's the thing about family. Sometimes the ones who claim to save you are the same ones who chain you. Evelyn wasn't just my aunt. She was the woman who took me in when my parents couldn't. To the outside world, she played the role of a savior. But behind closed doors? Well, let's just say that her kindness always came with fine print, interest rates included. So how did we end up here? How did a boy who once ate off her dinner table find himself accused of being a debtor to the very person who claimed to raise him? Let's rewind. Before the gavel, before the smirk, before Evelyn thought she could turn motherhood into a receipt. Because if you really want to understand how I got here, you need to know the beginning, the nights that were colder than they should have been, the sacrifices that went unseen, and the ways I learned, sometimes painfully, that love isn't always free, and trust me, what happened in that courtroom wasn't the end. It was the start of something much bigger, so settle in, grab your coffee, or maybe your popcorn. This isn't just my story, it's a story about survival, justice, and the kind of redemption money can't buy. Welcome, story lovers! From where are you watching? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. In fact, I'm not even sure we had spoons most days. My early childhood was a blur of simple meals, quiet prayers, and a household that ran on survival instead of comfort. My parents, God bless them, tried their best. My dad worked long hours at a factory, and my mom juggled side jobs, cleaning houses or sewing late into the night just to keep the lights on. We weren't rich, but we were a family, and that mattered more than anything, at least until life decided to rewrite the script. When I was 12, everything unraveled. My dad died suddenly, one of those freak accidents at the factory that no one prepares for. One phone call, and just like that, he was gone. My mom was shattered. The woman who had once been my anchor looked like a ghost of herself, worn down by grief and exhaustion. She tried to hold us together, but grief is a heavy debt, and she had no strength left to pay it. Within a year, she collapsed under the weight of it all, mentally, emotionally, financially. That's when Aunt Evelyn swooped in. To outsiders, it looked noble. She stepped up when no one else did. "I'll raise him," she told the family. "I'll give him a chance at life." Everyone nodded, relieved that someone was willing to take responsibility. No one asked me what I wanted. I was a kid, and kids don't get a vote in those decisions. At first, I clung to the idea that maybe this was a blessing in disguise. Evelyn lived in a nicer house. She had a steady job as a school administrator. She seemed organized, sharp, capable. Maybe this was the reset I needed. Maybe I'd get to focus on school again, maybe even chase the dreams I whispered to myself at night. Dreams of becoming a writer, of telling stories that mattered. But dreams, as I learned, have a way of shrinking under someone else's roof. Life with Evelyn wasn't cruel in the obvious ways. She didn't beat me or starve me. No, her weapon was subtler. It was the constant reminder that I was a burden. Every meal came with commentary. "Do you know how much this costs?" Every new pair of shoes carried a ledger entry in her mental accounting book. She never let me forget that my presence came with a price tag. I tried to bury myself in schoolwork. Books became my sanctuary. Teachers noticed I was bright, maybe even gifted. One encouraged me to apply to advanced programs. Another told me I had a knack for storytelling. For a while, I let myself believe I could break the cycle, that my life wouldn't always be defined by scarcity. But Evelyn didn't see education as an investment. She saw it as an expense. When the suggestion of extracurriculars came up, she'd scoff, "Who's going to pay for that? You or me? College?" She laughed in my face. "Dream smaller," she said. "People like us don't get those chances." And so, my dreams went onto a shelf. Not gone, just collecting dust while I worked part-time jobs after school to earn my keep. I mowed lawns, cleaned basements, stocked shelves at a grocery store. My paycheck didn't go into my pocket. It went into Evelyn's hand. She said it was to cover my share. I was 16, already paying rent in a house I didn't choose to live in. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was it, if this was all my life would ever be. A kid repaying a debt he never agreed to. A dreamer, too, broke to chase his dreams. Still, survival teaches you small acts of rebellion. Mine came in the form of stolen moments. I'd sneak into the public library, losing myself in the smell of books and the quiet hum of possibility. I'd copy down quotes from authors who felt like friends, words that reminded me there was a bigger world out there. I saved coins, nickels, dimes, quarters, in a jar hidden behind a stack of old socks, imagining it would someday buy me a one-way ticket out. There was also the small act of hope I carried like contraband, a spiral notebook where I scribbled my stories. Tales of heroes who rose from nothing, characters who were underestimated, dismissed, yet still found ways to shine. I wrote in the dark, sometimes with a flashlight, careful not to let Evelyn catch me. She would have called it a waste of time. Looking back, I realized those scraps of paper were more than stories. They were survival. Every word was a reminder that my voice mattered, even if no one in that house wanted to hear it. But life under Evelyn wasn't just about crushed dreams. It was about little humiliations that stacked up like bricks on my shoulders. The way she introduced me to her friends as the boy I'm raising, as if I were a charity project. The way she used me as free labor, babysitting her kids, cleaning her kitchen, running errands, while reminding me that I owed her. And maybe I did owe her in some way. She had put a roof over my head when I needed one. But she also made sure that roof came with invisible chains. The moment everything truly fell apart, though, came at 17. I had managed to secure a small scholarship for college, enough to cover tuition at a state university. It felt like my lifeline, my chance to finally break free. When I brought the acceptance letter home, Evelyn barely glanced at it. "Who's going to pay for the rest?" she asked flatly. "You think I'm funding this little adventure?" I tried to argue, to explain that I'd work part-time, that I'd figure it out. She shook her head, already dismissing me. "You're not going." End of discussion. And just like that, my future was reduced to ashes at the kitchen table. That night, I cried harder than I had since losing my dad. Not just because my dreams were slipping away, but because I realized the truth. Evelyn didn't want me to leave. She needed me to stay, to keep paying, to keep owing. Freedom threatened her power. So I stayed. I worked. I survived. And little by little, I learned that survival isn't just about keeping your body alive. It's about keeping your spirit from being crushed. And that was the hardest part of all. Sometimes life doesn't change with fireworks. Sometimes it shifts with the smallest crack in the wall. A door you didn't think was meant for you suddenly opening an inch. For me, that door appeared at the grocery store where I'd been stocking shelves for nearly 2 years. It was just another long evening shift. The kind where your back aches and you wonder if your entire life will always be fluorescent lights and minimum wage. But that night, I overheard a manager talking to a customer about a community college scholarship program, one specifically designed for youth from disadvantaged backgrounds. The phrase stung a little, but it also lit something in me. I knew what disadvantaged felt like. If anyone qualified, it was me. I went home that night buzzing with a hope I hadn't felt in years. The scholarship application deadline was tight, but I threw myself into it, digging out old essays, staying up late in the library, asking one of my teachers to write a recommendation. I didn't tell Evelyn. I knew exactly what she would say. "Don't waste your time. You'll never get it. Weeks later, a letter arrived. My hands shook as I tore it open. Against all odds, I had been awarded the scholarship. It wasn't everything. It covered tuition, but not living expenses. But to me, it was a lifeline. A chance to carve out a future that wasn't dictated by Evelyn's ledger of debts. When I told her, she barely blinked. So what? You think tuition pays the rent? You think books are free? Don't expect me to carry the rest. Her words cut, but I refused to let them bury me this time. I took extra shifts, scraped every dollar I could, even sold the old bike I used to ride around town. Somehow I made it work. For the first time, I felt the taste of freedom, sitting in a classroom where no one saw me as a burden, where I was just another student with a shot at something bigger. But freedom has a way of making other people nervous. Evelyn began to change. She didn't like the idea of me spending less time at her house, less time doing chores, less time handing over every cent I earned. She made snide comments about how ungrateful I was becoming. And when I started working as a library assistant on campus, she accused me of hiding money from her. It was during this time that I met someone who would become pivotal in my journey, Professor Daniels. He taught English literature, a subject I'd always loved in secret. One day, he noticed me lingering after class, scribbling in my notebook. He asked what I was working on, and when I shyly admitted I was writing short stories, he asked to see one. I hesitated. Evelyn had always told me writing was pointless, a waste of time. But something in his tone felt safe. I handed over the notebook, heart racing. The next class, he pulled me aside. "You have a gift," he said simply. "Don't waste it." Those words were like oxygen. For the first time, someone outside my own head believed in me. He encouraged me to submit to the campus literary magazine, and when my story was published, I felt a jolt of recognition I'd never experienced before. People read my words and felt something. They saw me, but Evelyn saw none of this as an accomplishment. To her, it was a betrayal. "Stories don't pay bills," she sneered when she caught me writing late one night. "While you're off chasing dreams, who's helping around here? Who's paying me back?" And that's when it began, the narrative she spun that I owed her. At first it was subtle, a passing remark at family gatherings, comments about how much she had sacrificed for me. But it grew louder, more insistent, until it became a drumbeat I couldn't escape. One particularly sharp blow came at a holiday dinner. Surrounded by relatives, she raised her glass and declared, "I gave this boy everything: food, shelter, clothes on his back, and what do I get in return? Nothing but attitude." Everyone chuckled awkwardly, assuming it was just Evelyn being Evelyn. But I sat there burning inside, humiliated. She wasn't joking. She was rewriting my childhood into a transaction. The injustice of it gnawed at me. I knew the truth, that I had worked, paid, sacrificed, but she had twisted the story until I was cast as the debtor, not the survivor. And the worst part? People believed her. It all came to a head when I was offered a small internship during my final semester. It didn't pay much, but it was a foot in the door, a chance to build a career in publishing. I accepted immediately. When Evelyn found out, she exploded. "So you're just leaving? After everything I've done? You think you can run off and forget your debts?" I tried to reason with her, to explain that this was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. But she wasn't hearing me. Her voice dripped with venom as she said, "You'll regret this. You think you're free? You're not. You owe me, and one day you'll pay." I walked out of her house that night with nothing but a backpack and a notebook, feeling both terrified and liberated. It was the first time I had truly chosen myself, but I had underestimated Evelyn. A few months later, after I'd graduated and started piecing my life together, a letter arrived that nearly knocked me off my feet. It was from her lawyer. Evelyn was suing me for $30,000. She claimed it was compensation for raising me, itemized like a grocery receipt. Rent, utilities, food, clothing. She had turned every moment of my childhood into a bill. At first, I thought it was a sick joke. Who does that? But as I sat there staring at the paperwork, my hands trembling, I realized she was deadly serious. She was coming for me, and that's when the real conflict began. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about rewriting history, about erasing every sacrifice I had made and painting me as nothing more than a freeloader. I could have stayed quiet. I could have settled, paid her off, kept the peace. But I had been quiet my whole life, and where had it gotten me? Humiliated, controlled, forgotten. This time, I wasn't going to stay quiet. This time, I was going to fight. The day of the hearing felt like walking into an execution chamber. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant, and every footstep echoed like it was announcing my doom. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for my truth, for the right to not be labeled a debtor to the woman who had chained my childhood. Evelyn arrived in her usual fashion, overdressed, dripping with jewelry she couldn't actually afford, her lips painted in a sharp shade of red that screamed confidence. She strutted into the courtroom like she owned it, clutching a thick binder of evidence. Her smirk told me she'd already written the ending in her head. Me humiliated, forced to pay, her reputation as the selfless savior intact. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and eyes that had clearly seen too many family disputes, called us to order. Evelyn's lawyer launched first, speaking with the practiced tone of someone who'd been paid to spin fairy tales. Your Honor, my client sacrificed her own resources, her own time, and her own livelihood to raise this young man. She provided food, clothing, and shelter for years without any repayment. We are simply seeking fair compensation for the expenses incurred. It was surreal. He spoke as though I'd been some luxury tenant overstaying my lease, not a grieving child thrust into circumstances I never chose. And the numbers, oh, the numbers. Evelyn had itemized everything: rent, electricity, school supplies, even toothpaste. When it was my turn to respond, my voice trembled at first. I could feel the room's weight pressing down on me, the eyes of strangers, the hum of whispers. Evelyn looked at me like a predator circling prey. But then something inside me snapped. A lifetime of swallowed words, of quiet suffering, of being painted as less, it all surged to the surface. Your Honor, I began, steadying my voice. This isn't a lawsuit. This is a story of manipulation. I told them about mowing lawns at 16 and handing over every paycheck, about stocking grocery shelves after school, only to have the cash snatched from my hands, about babysitting Evelyn's kids, cooking her dinners, cleaning her house, all under the guise of repaying her. She never raised me out of love, I said, my voice rising. She raised me like a bill she intended to collect. But I've already paid. I paid with my childhood, my dreams, my dignity. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. For the first time, Evelyn's smirk faltered, and then came the twist, the evidence I had carried like a lifeline. From my college years, I had kept pay stubs, bank slips, and even emails showing the money I earned and how it went straight to Evelyn. I laid them out for the judge, proof that I had been more than pulling my weight. But the most damning piece wasn't mine. It was Evelyn's own handwriting. Years ago, she had scribbled notes on a calendar. John's paycheck in, rent covered, books paid by him. I'd found it tucked away in an old drawer, forgotten. I brought it to court. The judge studied it carefully, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Evelyn. Is this your handwriting? Her face flushed crimson. That's just notes. It doesn't mean, but the damage was done. The room knew. The truth was out. In that moment, I wasn't the scared kid anymore. I wasn't the boy cowering at a kitchen table while my dreams were dismissed. I was the young man who had survived, who had endured, who was finally being heard. The judge leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Mrs. Evelyn, what I see here is not a selfless guardian seeking repayment. What I see is someone who benefited financially and domestically from the labor of a child. This case is not only without merit, it borders on exploitation. The silence that followed was thick, electric. Evelyn's lawyer cleared his throat, mumbling something about miscommunication, but the judge raised a hand. Case dismissed. With prejudice. The gavel fell like thunder, sealing the verdict. For a split second, I sat frozen, unable to process the weight that had just lifted. Then, as Evelyn sputtered in outrage, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Liberation. The chains she had wrapped around me, forged from guilt and manipulation, shattered in that moment. She turned to me, eyes blazing, and hissed, You'll regret this. But her voice sounded small now, almost pitiful. For the first time, I realized her power had always been borrowed from my silence. And I had just taken it back. As I walked out of the courtroom, people glanced at me differently, not as a debtor, not as a burden, but as someone who had stood his ground. The boy who once owed everything now owed her nothing. And Evelyn? She was left speechless. Dear audience, if you're still with me, if this moment hit you like it hit me, don't forget to give this story a like. It really helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. The silence after the storm was almost surreal. For years, Ruth had been defined by struggle, by the weight of bills, the echo of slammed doors, and the whisper of dreams that had slipped through her fingers. But now she stood on the other side of the battlefield, not as a cleaner, not as the invisible woman who slipped in and out of boardrooms unseen, but as the person who had dismantled a multi-million-dollar fraud with nothing more than grit, persistence, and a napkin full of numbers. The company begged her to stay. A corner office, a six-figure salary, the kind of title people spent decades chasing. It was all hers if she wanted it. But Ruth had seen too much. She knew that power in those halls wasn't earned through honesty, but by covering lies with polished smiles. And Ruth had no interest in polishing lies. Instead, she walked away. Not out of pride, but out of purpose. She used her whistleblower settlement, money she once could only dream of, to build something the world truly needed. A consulting firm that specialized in forensic accounting for nonprofits, small businesses, and ordinary families who couldn't afford to be cheated. She named it Second Sight Consulting because she knew what it felt like to be overlooked, and she wanted others to see what was hidden before it destroyed them. But Ruth didn't just stop at business. She remembered the women she used to sit beside in late-night diner shifts. Women with calloused hands and weary eyes. Women who never complained but silently carried the weight of entire families. She created scholarships for single mothers to study accounting. She opened weekend classes at community centers, teaching financial literacy to women who had been told numbers weren't for them. Her clients grew from local bakeries to national nonprofits. Eventually, even Fortune 500 companies came knocking, not out of generosity, but necessity. Ruth had built a reputation for being fearless, incorruptible, and brilliant. Her name alone could restore trust in a balance sheet. Her son, now a young man, watched all of it unfold with wide eyes. He had grown up in hospital rooms and cramped apartments, where his mother whispered strength into him on nights when the world seemed merciless. Now, he was thriving, top of his class with a scholarship letter in his backpack. He once told her, "Mom, I don't want to be rich. I just want to be like you." That was the first time Ruth cried in years, not out of sadness, but out of the strange, healing joy of knowing her sacrifices had not been in vain. Still, Ruth carried her scars. There were mornings when she woke up before dawn, muscle memory pulling her toward the cleaning closet as if she still had to scrub floors before sunrise. There were nights when she stared at the old degree on her wall, the one she once thought would rot beside expired food stamps. But instead of bitterness, she felt gratitude, because every wound had carved out the space for strength. Every humiliation had been the soil where resilience took root. One evening, she found herself back in a familiar place, a conference room. But this time she wasn't holding a mop or emptying trash bins. She was leading a seminar, surrounded by young women in pressed blouses and notebooks open wide. She told them about debits and credits, about fraud detection, about the power of paying attention to the smallest details. But in between the technical talk, she wove her real story, the truth about being underestimated, about survival, about how invisible people see what the powerful often miss. The room was silent. Not the silence of dismissal, but the silence of awe. These women weren't looking through her as executives once had. They were hanging on to every word, seeing in her not a cleaner, not a whistleblower, but a blueprint for what was possible. That night, as she walked to her car, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement, Ruth smiled. Not the tired smile of someone faking endurance, but the steady, quiet smile of someone who finally felt seen. Her life wasn't glamorous. She didn't wear designer suits or fly private jets, but she no longer counted coins at the grocery store, no longer felt the shame of choosing between dinner and electricity. She didn't live in fear of being discarded again. Instead, she lived with purpose. And perhaps that was the most radical thing of all. Ruth had rewritten the story others wrote for her. She had gone from cleaner to consultant, from invisible to undeniable, and while the world still spun with greed, betrayal, and injustice, Ruth knew she had carved out her corner of light. She had built a life where numbers told the truth, where women were given tools instead of excuses, where survival transformed into strength, and strength into legacy. Her son once asked her if she ever regretted the years lost, the dreams deferred, the nights spent cleaning while her peers built careers. Ruth thought about it for a long time. Then she shook her head. "No," she said softly, "because those years taught me the one thing no classroom ever could, how to fight when no one believes in you. And that's worth more than any degree." And so, Ruth's story didn't end in that boardroom where she exposed the fraud. It didn't end with applause or headlines. It began there. It began when she walked out carrying nothing but the truth, and chose to build something better, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they were invisible. Today, when Ruth walks into a room, people notice. Not because of her clothes or her title, but because of the gravity she carries, the quiet authority of someone who has lived through fire and come out sharpened, not broken. She is no longer the woman sweeping floors in silence. She is the woman who teaches others how to stand tall in the storm. And that more than money, more than recognition, is her redemption. Thanks for watching. If Ruth's journey inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More powerful, true-to-life stories coming your way every week. They once called Ruth just a cleaner. But what no one realized back then was that Ruth had been cleaning up messes long before she ever held a mop. Financial messes, emotional messes, the shattered remains of a life she never chose but had the courage to endure. Her story isn't just about fraud or numbers. It's about perseverance. It's about the quiet dignity of a woman who refused to let her pain become her prison. Ruth didn't need applause. She didn't crave titles. She wasn't chasing status. What she wanted was far greater: peace, security for her son, and the right to be seen for who she truly was. And now, she has it. She built a life where truth mattered more than profit, where survival transformed into legacy. But here's the twist. Ruth's story didn't just change her own life. It rippled outward. One of the women she mentored, once a single mother juggling 2 part-time jobs, is now the chief financial officer of a respected nonprofit. Another became a fraud investigator for the state, protecting families from the very kinds of schemes Ruth once exposed. Her fingerprints are everywhere, not on windows or desks anymore, but on futures. That's the legacy of people like Ruth. They don't just lift themselves, they lift everyone around them. So the next time you see someone invisible, the janitor, the cashier, the tired mother balancing bills on the bus ride home, remember Ruth. Remember that their title doesn't tell their story. Their dreams do. And maybe ask yourself, how many Ruths are walking past us every single day unnoticed? How many lives could change if someone believed in them, or if they dared to believe in themselves? Because sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one carrying the loudest truth. And sometimes the person sweeping the floor is the one who can sweep away corruption, despair, and injustice, if only given the chance. Ruth wasn't invisible after all. She was undeniable. And through her, we're reminded of something simple but powerful. Greatness doesn't always sit at the head of the table. Sometimes it starts in the shadows, waiting for the courage to step into the light. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and new videos.